Just by introduction, just to say a few words about who I am and who I represent. My name is Anna Riggall, and I am the head of research at an organisation called Education Development Trust. We are an international education organisation. We have our main office in the UK, in England, but we have offices in other parts of the world as well. Our main business is delivering large-scale education programs around the world. And the small profits that we make on that, we invest in our charitable side, which is mainly invested into a program of educational research, and that's where my job comes in, and I help to spend that money wisely on programs that we can learn from. I'm delighted to say at the moment we're working with QRTA on a project, not in the same space as rapid school improvement, but I think linked to this whole idea of quality improvements in education. So that's something that maybe some of you are involved in. I'm not sure yet who we have in the room, and we'll have a small exercise shortly to understand who we have here and the expertise and experience that you bring to this session. Today, I'm going to be drawing on is one research project, but we produced 2 reports. Initially, the research is very English. We looked at a particularly interesting group of schools in England and tried to understand what we could learn from this group. We think actually the issue of underperformance of government schools is an international one. It's not particularly, we have this issue in England, but it's one that I think other countries experience as well. So we produced a more global version of the report, which uses slightly different terminology. It's a little bit shorter. It makes it a little bit more accessible. I actually have some copies of the report here. So at the end of the session, if anybody would like to take one, please come and help yourself. If you don't manage to take a hard copy today, you can download all of our research, including this, from our website for free. But we do not charge for any of the research work that we produce. So please do visit the website as well, and I'll give you the address at the end. I think in this workshop, what I would like to achieve is to share with you some of what we learned from doing this research. But I have to say it was a modest size project. It's very English, as I said, based only on a small group of English schools. So I'm very keen to hear what you have to say about our findings, how we have understood our data, how we have interpreted this, the framework that we have, if you like, for rapid school improvement that we've derived from this. I don't think it's perfect, and I'm really interested to hear whether you think it works in your context as well. So please do get involved. I'm going to focus very much on the role of school leaders in the process of turning around government schools, and also teachers, particularly looking at teacher quality. So just a few words about the study that we did. In much of our research over the last couple of years, we're very interested in bright spots. We don't have an awful lot of research money, so we have to think very carefully about how we spend it. And we think there's an enormous amount that you can learn from looking at areas which are typically underperforming, where you can find examples of excellence. You can find examples of people bucking the trend. They're doing something surprising. And in England, we have our inspectorate, Ofsted. Some of you may have heard of Ofsted. They're sort of renowned the world over for being particularly difficult to please. And we found, when looking at schools in England how they had performed, there we go. Okay, hopefully that will stay. No. Please stay. So we found a particularly interesting and unusual group of schools. So they had been judged by Ofsted, the inspectorate, to be awful. They were terrible. They were at the bottom of the pile. These schools were chronically underperforming. And they had turned themselves around and been judged within one inspection cycle, which in England is 2 years. Within one inspection cycle, they were good or outstanding. So that's a move of 2 or 3 jumps up the ladder, if you like. There's over 20,000 government schools in England, and this study is primary and secondary. But there's only 360 of those 25,000 plus schools that actually met the criteria and could be included in the study. So I think a particularly interesting group of schools, and something that we would consider to be an interesting bright spot. What's going on here? How did these schools change from being so bad to being really quite good in a relatively short period of time? Our study set out to do a number of things. First of all, we were interested in finding, if you think about rapid school improvement and you look out into the wider world at the evidence, what does it say? What's the formula for rapid school improvement? We didn't expect to find a simple formula, but I guess that's what we went to look for first of all. Then we thought, well, actually, we have a really interesting group of schools. What can we learn from them? What did these school leaders tell us about how they did it? What actions did they take? If we look across what all of them say, will we find a theory of change of some kind, a formula for doing this? Will we find any other factors, any surprising things which are not in the literature, which people don't already know about how you turn around schools very quickly? And we were also interested in whether the school leaders' view of their account of the events was also shared by the teachers and the school board, the members of the school board as well, or was this just the way the school leaders saw it? So we were interested also in talking to more people, not just the school leaders, and we were quite keen on testing what the school leaders told us with other groups of people, so we did some case studies and some other aspects too. So just in summary, our method, if you like, I won't spend too long on this because I think we want to get to the heart of how you do this, not what we did necessarily, but we did some fairly extensive reading. We identified this very interesting group of schools. We did a survey, first of all. We invited all of them to take part in the research, all 360, but about 100 agreed and actually took part. We then looked at the survey results and chose a subsample of head teachers to go and speak to, and we spent a long time talking to them, trying to understand the story of what had happened in their school. And then we did some visits to schools as well to talk to the school board and to talk to some of the teachers who were involved in the change. Now, obviously, the time when we went in was after the change. So in many cases, people had moved on. So we had to pick these schools quite carefully so we could actually talk to teachers who were still there, but had been there during the transformation as well. So it was quite retrospective in many ways. And I think that the sort of nature of the kind of research that we do, we try to bring an academic rigor to the work that we do, but actually we're not a university. We don't need to report in the same ways that academics do. So we're very applied in our findings. We look for useful information that we can share elsewhere. So today I'm going to share with you our findings, but stop frequently to hear your views, to give you opportunities to discuss and share your thoughts too. So first of all, some introductions to get a sense of who is in the room. I'd be very keen for you to talk on your tables, maybe amongst twos or threes if you're on a very large table. Just share with each other your role currently. If you work in a school or you work with schools, what are the challenges, what are the strengths of your school or the schools that you work with? And have you ever worked in a school that has undergone a rapid transformation, a very big change in a positive direction? Just don't say too much about that yes, maybe just a yes or a no. I have experience of this or I don't have experience of this, okay? So role, school, strengths and challenges, and whether you've ever worked in a challenging environment of rapid transformation. I'll give you just a few minutes and then maybe we can recap. Okay, maybe I can interrupt you now. I'm very sorry, you're deep in conversation, some of you, but it would be really useful for me to find out a little bit more about you as well. So perhaps I can share the microphone with a few people and you could summarize your brief discussion. Just give an overview of your roles. We're school leaders, we're inspectors, we're teachers, that sort of thing I think would be really good. So maybe I can pick on you first.
Name or
role?
role, yeah. Head of high school, مقاصد علي بن أبي طالب college. Strength, technology, expert teachers I have. Challenges, parents support. Yes? Last question, yes.
Principal of Ali bin Abi Talib College. School هي علي بن أبي طالب principal. The strength هي technology in our school. Challenges هي parents support.
I'm also from Lebanon, school principal. The main concept at our school is يعني goes under the title everyone deserves to learn, and the culture of, if we can say, of the school is under below financially low level culture, if you can say. So the challenge we have, how can we provide our learners a good quality of education under their private or special circumstances they have.
Yes, exactly. So our group is basically comprised of a teacher, a coordinator, and the school principal. We represent the Armenian Evangelical School in Lebanon. So we cannot say that we have had a rapid improvement in our school programs. However, in both of our schools, we realized that the encouragement towards a personalized educational program is good, and we have managed to establish this program where we pull out the students that are in need with educational difficulties, and they need to cover the educational gaps, so special education basically. In this field, we are seeing improvements, although we still have a lot of challenges, especially between teacher challenges, different of mentalities, ages, and educational level. Also, financial and challenges that are related to socioeconomic backgrounds of the students.
Okay, I'll just pick on one more table. Any volunteers? Maybe I can invite you ladies. Would you like to summarize your discussion?
Maybe when I took the 5 E's training with the Queen Rans Academy, I affected our teacher in my school by changing their strategies with the education. And the other one, I am in a just faraway village. I wasn't wearing hijab when I go there. So it was like they are looking like my appearance. And in this way, I could change some of the students look to the one who are not wearing hijab. So this is one of my biggest role I played in my school.
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, I will move on, but maybe we could just do a show of hands. If you're a teacher, could you indicate? If you're a school leader? If you're, you have another role? Okay, thank you very much. I'll tell you next just a little bit about some of the schools that were involved in our study and give you a sense of the challenges that they faced. I guess the question is, how bad were they? And as I said earlier, the inspectorate, Ofsted, is particularly difficult to please, and they look at quite a broad range of things when assessing a school. It is heavily influenced by the student outcomes, the test scores. This is a big part of it, but it's other things too. It's the teaching, they observe lessons, they look at students' books, they look at the teachers' marking, they talk to lots of people, including the parents, and they form an overall judgment. These schools, they ranged, I mean, they were all doing badly, so pupil outcomes were low. Teacher retention was poor. The ethos, the motivation was weak. But they ranged, I guess, from being on one end of the scale, lacking vision, lacking coherence. They had no real plan. And on the other end of the spectrum, they were quite dangerous places, often unsafe for pupils, unsafe for teachers, and very chaotic places to work in. So very extreme examples, I guess, across this line. Some quotes from some of the head teachers. So in one of our case studies, a head teacher said this about the inspection report. It was pretty damning. The first page just says, achievement is inadequate, teaching and learning are inadequate, leadership and management are inadequate. Another head teacher said, when I came here, everything was appalling. There was nothing that wasn't appalling. And perhaps the worst one member of staff had said to the head teacher when her child was given a place at that school, she cried because she was so sad that her own child had to attend the school. So I think it says quite a lot about the quality of education and the quality of life in some of the schools that took part in our study. So on to the important bit. So how do you bring about speedy change? How do you bring about quick change in schools where the level of education is so poor? And as I said, just to stress again, I'll share the findings from our study, but please, over the course of the day, do share your thoughts too. What I want to do next is a very quick survey. So if you have a mobile phone or an iPad or something that you can connect to the internet, please get it ready while I just do some swapping. Okay, so are you familiar with Kahoot? Yeah, so if you can go to Kahoot.it, I believe. And when you get to Kahoot.it, so if you go to your search engine and type Kahoot.it, and then you enter this code, which will come up shortly, and that will connect you to this screen. No right answers or wrong answers, okay? It's just to get you thinking. So we'll start. final one. Okay, it's very interesting. Okay, before we move on to me share the findings from the research, I would appreciate on your tables if you could just briefly discuss these questions. So any experience you have of working in a school that has transformed, have you ever been tasked yourself with leading this change? How did you do it? Or how are you trying to do it? If you're a teacher, so you're not, maybe it's not your responsibility, but you're going through it or you have gone through it, then you can use those experiences too. Interested also in successes and really also in the challenges that you face too. So I'll give you just 5 minutes for this and then we'll share some thoughts. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much everybody. It sounds like some interesting discussions. Maybe I can pick on this table first just to share. You don't have to answer every question, but just to share an idea of your discussion would be. Thank you.
Hello. Hi. So my name is Masa Dalgamoni. I work in education. I've been in the field for the past 20 years. I work in one of our educational institutes, and it was transformed fully. Now, this institute works with young ages, so we are talking about KGs and preschools. And what I noticed from the transformation, and I lived this transformation, is that we suddenly found ourselves focused on the core of education. And this allowed us as a team to tackle what is happening on the desk and inside this class. So what is really happening there? At the same time, looking at what they say, the curriculum or the outcomes we need, and looking at the teachers from the other side as being continuous learners. So we started a learning, or I would call it professional learning programs with them. And at the same time, meanwhile, we explained our vision to the parents so that they would be involved in this transformation and they won't be blocking our way to go through it. So going through those three made us just move. We felt that the place, all in all, it moved to another level completely. And this took us about 3 years to accomplish or to feel that we could manage to move forward. Now, what was the task? The task was I learned personally. Now, not for all the team. My task was to learn, know more, and implement more. That was my task. How did I do it? I communicated with the team all the time. What was the success? The success was seeing happy children. That was it. We could see before that they were coming in and leaving as they came in. And then after this, whenever I go, I can see the reflection on the children. So that was a success for us. And seeing happy teachers who are continuously learning for the sake of learning, not just for the sake of getting a certification. The greatest challenges was to move the whole team to a learning mode where they are continuously learning. That was the largest, I would say, challenge for us. And how was this achieved? I don't know. It's a good question to think about.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm just going to come over to the other side of the room because I think there was an interesting discussion happening on this table too. Lots of comments. So, would anybody like to volunteer to give a summary of your discussion? Okay.
Okay, I was talking with my colleague this morning about coursework that I have done last week with my teachers. I entered for them when I started telling them about the process that we have to do. I felt that they cannot achieve anything. When I felt these things on their facial expressions here, I stood in the board and I wrote, "You can do it. Teachers, you can do it." And by the time I have a lot of activities for my teachers, they start struggling and they somehow express themselves. They started telling me, "We can't do it. How can we do this one? This is too difficult." By the time, the more that I involved, they were engaged in the exercises and the activities. At the end of the day, really they did it. The motto that for that day, they wrote by themselves, "We can do it." And finally we did it. I have a lot of photos for their flip charts that they have written here. What I want to say here all the time, my colleagues tell me, if teachers want, because I'm not a teacher, we are supervisors, okay? And I say to them here, our problem is exactly not the same as teachers every day, because as a teacher, you are working with your students daily, and you can figure out and diagnose what are the problems with your teacher, with your students, and you can work on. But for us as supervisors, we have to move every day for different schools, but the general ideas here is there. Whenever you encourage your students, the same is done with us as supervisors. Whenever we encourage our teachers, they can achieve something here. But with a lot of work, we have to ask them at least to achieve the minimum things that they can do, knowing that teachers, they have a lot of responsibilities every day, and we cannot impose things on them or enforce them to do these things here. We have to find a kind of a freedom whenever we have to ask teachers to do their things. But at the end of the day, if you kept encouragement for them, I think they will achieve a lot.
Thank you. Yes.
With respect to our group, with respect to the first two questions, the answer is yes. How did we do it? Actually, we focus on three issues. Our school's policies and procedures, personal discipline, and organizational discipline. The success, all the stakeholders, all of them, following policies and procedures. And regarding the last one is, yes, the challenge is people resist change. You always find someone is resisting the change.
It's really interesting, actually, and much of what you've just said, I'm going to say in a minute, because there's great similarity with some of the things we found. Before I go on, just to go back to the Kahoot exercise, it was a little silly, but interestingly, we agreed, our findings agreed with the first question about the role of the school leader. Clearly, they're vital in the process of rapid change. Very interestingly, our school leaders did not really consult the research evidence to help them. So I think your ideas there are actually much better. For them, it was all about teacher quality, teacher effectiveness. This is the thing that they felt they needed to address. And they actually valued most the support from the inspectors. And they did not value the support they got from their school board. But mainly, I think that's because the school board was also, in most cases, very weak and underperforming. So it was not really providing the support you would expect from a school board. But yeah, very interesting comparison. So to jump on then to some of the findings from our study and think about these and see if they resonate with your ideas. I think they do to some extent. So there were four main elements, and actually it's a small study, but I think it's more powerful despite its size because everybody agreed. There was very little disagreement. They were unanimous in their views. They took the same action in every school, pretty much. Exercise number 1 was to ensure the school principal was effective. Exercise number 2 was to instigate this emergency action phase, which was quite short-lived, about 6 months of emergency action to change things quite quickly, and then set about the longer-term planning. And then these two things, number 3 and 4, are very closely linked to the separate sides of the same coin, really. So they diagnosed weaknesses in the teaching, and they addressed weaknesses in the teaching. So I'll say a little bit more about each of these 4 areas and what they did. So in terms of the effectiveness of the school principal, this was a vital thing to address, first of all. And in many of the schools, about half the schools, the head teacher who was in post at the time of the really bad inspection was fired, and a new head teacher was brought in. And in about half the schools, the head teacher survived, and they were the person who took forward the transformation. They all did a very similar set of things. So teaching quality was something they had to address urgently. They had to be responsible for the change. They had to drive the change. They had no support. It was a one-man show, really, or one-woman show. Monitoring and motivation were 2 really important parts of their job. And coalitions for change, which I think is exactly what the lady over there was saying. You have to get on board your parents, your stakeholders, otherwise you can't, nobody will follow you, so you have to bring these people with you, and we use this term coalitions for change to describe that. Often the greatest resistance they faced was from the teaching staff, so if they made friends with the parents, who were often really unhappy and very cross because their children were going to these schools and they were terrible. So if they made friends with the parents and the parents believed in them, then the teachers were almost forced into a position of submission. They had to go along with it because you could stand up to one person, but you couldn't stand up to the head teacher, just one person and the parent body. It was too big. External support was really important. So although they were a lonely figure in the school driving the change, they actually stepped outside the school. They spoke to the inspectors. In England, if you have an inadequate inspection, if you have this terrible inspection, you get support and you have regular monitoring visits from the inspectorate. And they really liked that. They found these really useful. They were able to see the progress they were making. They were able to talk to someone about the focus that they were taking. Were they on the right track? Were they making the right kind of changes? So these external visits were really important. And they also turned to other schools. So they tried to reduce the isolation. In almost every case, the school was very isolated. It wasn't friends with its neighboring schools. It wasn't talking to other schools. They weren't visiting other schools. They weren't doing professional development with other teachers. So they were very isolated. It was difficult on a personal level for the school teachers. So perhaps you can suggest some things, what personal characteristics would a school leader need? I know some of you here have said that you are doing this now, or you have done this in your careers. So perhaps you can just shout some ideas about the personal characteristics that a school leader needs to drive forward this kind of change. Any volunteers? Yeah, just shout out. Just hands up and shout. Yes. Yeah. Yep. Open-mindedness. Mm-hmm. Yes. Persistence, creativity. Flexibility. Yep. Yeah. Innovator. Sorry, what's the visibility? Yes, very important. Yep. Yep. Yeah, all of these things and more. I'm sure you could go on. Some of the stories that we told. So not so much the survey, we asked questions about what it was like to do this change, and we got some answers. But when we went back to talk to some of the head teachers, we spent a long time going through the story. And in every case, they told us how personally challenging this was, how lonely it was sometimes to be the head teacher driving forward this change. And they said, these are the things you need. You need optimism, you need motivation, you have to be willing to go to others and ask for help and ask for support. You need resilience strength of character, and you need technical skill. You need to be a good leader, you need to be a good teacher, you need to know what good teaching looks like, and all of these things. And there were many more, but these were the top ones that came through. Some of the quotes, I think, demonstrate some of the difficulty that these individuals experience. So one head teacher said, "You need to be courageous and resilient with a relentless focus on standards." Another said, "You have to be resilient, again, and committed to taking necessary actions, however unpleasant, to bring about the necessary changes." And another one, "You need to be resolute in bringing in change where it's needed. You need total focus on what that change is, and every action or decision taken must take you further towards the change. You must share your vision with passion and conviction to bring all on board, and you must do it all with a warm smile." So I think it required a great variety of skills. It's a really difficult job, basically, and not everybody would be able to do this. So this head teacher, I think, summarizes some of the other comments, determination, resilience, relentlessness, but you have to demonstrate the belief. You have to bring people with you, even on days when you don't feel like it. So the next part about taking emergency action. So this was another component of every story, this phase of emergency action. In this phase, the head teachers set about doing a number of different things. The first one was talent spotting. So they spent a lot of time in classrooms watching teaching, picking which teachers are good, which teachers are brilliant, which teachers need support. They also needed to transform cultural expectations. So often in these schools were full of well-intentioned, very busy people, not necessarily getting it right, but they were trying. But often the teachers didn't know what good teaching looked like. They didn't know what an active, busy classroom where everybody's learning looks like. So the head teachers had to change that culture. They had to change people's understanding about what good teaching, what good learning looks like. And then they had to work on consistency. So often, there were some great teachers in every school. Even the worst schools had great teachers, but not every teacher was good or great. So they had to work on that consistency across the school. And they had to set really high expectations. Often these schools were in deprived parts of the country, so poverty and lack of opportunity, lack of aspiration are often go hand in hand with the areas where these schools are, which makes, I think, it more challenging for educators in that setting. And often teachers had fallen into a negative behavior of saying, well, these kids don't want to do much, so it's okay that they don't get great grades because they don't want to go to university. And the new head teachers, or the surviving head teacher driving the change, had to challenge that, had to say, no, every child should aim to reach their potential and have the opportunity to go on. As I said earlier, building coalitions and rebuilding the trust of parents was really important. Moving towards the sense that it was not just the head teacher's responsibility to make sure it was a great school, it was everybody's responsibility. And then, as I suggested earlier as well, the school board in almost every case was very weak, and there were a lot of changes in personnel on the school board, and the building of capacity of that board was another important point. So after the emergency phase was complete, you had a good head teacher, you had better staff with a clearer vision of what they were trying to do, and you had a school board that was capable of supporting and challenging. So you could continue the momentum, if you like, but with a shared responsibility rather than all driven by the school leader. But they also said that this emergency phase, although it's important, it's only good enough to get you through the state of emergency, if you like. Once you're through that, you need a different approach to school improvement, and it might look quite different from this. So in terms of diagnosing the weaknesses in teaching and learning, they all of them, absolute top of their list was teacher quality. They really believed that was the key to making the change in the school. And the causes of poor teaching, they diagnosed as lower expectations, so teachers having lower expectations of pupil capacity and ability, really weak systems or no systems, or inaccurate systems for tracking pupil progress. Poor performance management, so teachers weren't being well managed by other senior leaders in the school. There was no real shared leadership, no distributed leadership. You had, little pockets of power in the school, but it wasn't a collective. And professional development, either there was no real professional development or it was very weak. It wasn't really having any desired impact. And obviously, the other side, what do you do about this? It's almost the other side of the coin. So, one thing to take away that addressing weak teaching quality is really complicated, and there's so many different parts to it that you can't address just one, you have to address many. And these are some of the things that they said, in particular in this emergency phase, that they were focused on. So, first of all, sorting out the tracking of academic performance. So, creating good systems for capturing data about pupil progress. It might be formal testing, but also the less formal testing and less formal assessments that teachers do on a more regular basis. So capturing this kind of information on a monthly or 6-weekly basis, and using that as the basis of conversations about learning, conversations about planning and that sort of thing. So that was really key, because then they could focus the teachers on the right kinds of activity, the activity that was needed to drive forward learning for those pupils. Performance management was another area that they addressed, and this, they were quite brutal in some cases. They were very keen to keep good teachers and to support weak teachers, but when they'd taken action to support, but a teacher still wasn't performing, the teacher was dismissed. And a lot of teachers left because they didn't like the new style of leadership. They didn't like the demands. They didn't like the school anymore. They needed a fresh challenge. But a lot of teachers also were asked to leave the school and the profession. They changed the way observation was done and made it much more formative, less summative, less scary, I guess, and more helpful. Making sure that teachers were getting really good feedback on a regular basis. And then I think really important is this one down here, hidden at the bottom, celebrating good practice. So they really, I think once they started to see good practice, they really started to shout about that in the school as well and encourage people that way. And I think the teachers in particular found that really positive. And professional development, they did this almost exclusively by opening their doors to other schools, inviting their teachers, the really good teachers in subjects from other schools to come in and talk to their staff or demonstrate how to teach and the other side of that, sending their teachers out to other schools. So there were no courses, no conferences, nothing like this. It was all school-to-school professional development. There's something of a framework that we derived. I think framework is perhaps a very fancy word for something really quite simple, but they suggested these were the key actions to take in terms of addressing teacher quality. And I wonder what you think of this, and whether you would agree. But I guess the summary of the actions is assessing performance, attitude, and capacity to be good for every staff member. Identifying the best and setting them to work. They were often became the models and the support teachers to other teachers. Supporting weaker teachers, but if that didn't work, firing the weakest teachers who weren't changing, which is quite brutal, but that's what they did. Bringing in new talented staff to build the capacity of the whole staff group, and supporting teachers with great professional development. So I'll pause there, because I think I've given you quite a lot of information. But I'm interested to hear your views. What do you think of this? If you're a teacher, you might have some quite strong views about this. If you've been through the process of supporting rapid improvement or school improvement of any kind, this may resonate. You may think this is wrong in some aspects. So I would be interested. So maybe take a few moments on your tables just to reflect on some of this. If you want me to flick back on any of the slides, just let me know and I'll do that. So I'll give you about 10 minutes to have a quick discussion, maybe just 5 minutes actually, because we've still got one more activity to do. So just 5 minutes. Yeah, thank you. Okay, in the interest of time, because we only have 20 minutes left, the time is flying. If I can ask you to stop briefly, this time I'm going to pick on this group. I wonder if you could just give us some thoughts. Does this resonate with your experience? Does it, in what areas do you think maybe it's different, it's a bit wrong in your, any thoughts?
As for me, I'm working at inclusive school. So it's new here in Jordan to accept students that are on wheelchair with other students that have autism, sensory issues. So we are dealing with these students with the ratio inside the class. We have 20 students maximum in each class, and the ratio is 1 for each 20 students. So we have a lot of challenges. From some of the challenges from the parents, some of them they deny the condition of their kid. We have challenges with the students also to accept these children. But we achieved a lot, but still we have more challenges and we have to do more.
Thank you. Okay, on your tables I've put a small pack. So this is, I have extracted from the booklet, the research report, the case studies at the end, and printed them separately, and then I have the titles at the top. So if you already have the booklet, please don't cheat. If you could very quickly read the case studies, it would just give you a better sense, I think, of some of the stories from these schools and these school leaders, and then see if you can match the title, these bits, with the case study. Don't worry if you don't get it right. Probably in the interest of time, it's best if you share out the case studies, so each of you reads one or two. Maybe you could join that group. There you go. So I'll give you just 10-12 minutes to do this. Okay, we're running out of time, so I appreciate you may not have finished, but the answers are here. So just, you can mark your own work on this one. Did anybody get them all right? Perfect. Well done. Okay, you can maybe, if you're interested, you can spend a bit more time looking at the report and reading the case studies at your leisure. But I just wanted to give you a bit more of an idea about the kind of stories, the narrative, if you like, of some of these schools that we worked with. I think the case studies, they summarize some of the key points. So this phase of emergency action being really important in rapid school improvement. But it's not enough to last forever in terms of improvement. You need something else longer term. Something maybe we didn't talk about very much today, but was really important is the second one. So having the authority to change the school was really key, particularly, not in every case study, but in some. There was one particular story that I remember, that the head teacher at the time of the terrible inspection had actually been stealing money from the school and was arrested, and later went to court, and it was a big case, and the deputy head was told to step up and take the leadership role. And initially, as an interim school leader, nobody would do what she said. She didn't have the power. She hadn't been given the authority. She'd been given the job, but not the authority. And later, after the inspection, so this happened before the inspection, the grades went down. The inspectorate came in, looked at the school, said, "This is terrible," graded it as inadequate, and then they made her the permanent head teacher and gave her the authority, gave her the mandate to effect change. And from that point onwards, it was a big upward trajectory, but because she'd been given the power, which previously she didn't have, even though she had the job. So we saw that in a few stories, not a lot, but it seemed to be important still. We talked also about working with other schools, not being isolated. And I think the last three, for me, really emphasize the importance of being a great teacher and understanding what great teaching is, even if you're a school leader. You need to have that knowledge, you need to have that credibility to support the staff that you're working with. So we're just about out of time, but we do have a few minutes for any questions or any comments that you wish to make before lunch. So I throw it open to you.
As a researcher, we've heard about the transformation of Singapore schools and many different schools. And I've heard about the academy that was done in the UK, the academy's approach where the principal, once they register as public school, they have a few years to transform the school. What do you think about this transforming policy strategy?
Okay, there's a big question, this one. So if you didn't hear, she's asked about the academy program in England and how this affects the transformation of schools. And interestingly, actually, about a third of these schools became academies after the terrible inspection. Some of them had to, some of them chose to. I'm not an expert on the academy, academization, but I think it can, if it works well, it can give the school the clarity, the vision, the map, the roadmap, if you like, to improvement. If you go into a good academy chain, which is like a collection of academy schools that work together under one management structure, sometimes that can provide a clear route to improvement, but sometimes it's more isolation. So I don't know, I've got some colleagues here in the corner, so I don't know if you, sorry, pick you at the moment. I don't know if you have anything to add. Sorry, Richard. Would there be anything that you'd add to that, Richard, about the academies and improvement?
Two different programs. So the Labour government had a program where a very failing school could be taken over, often in partnership with business, and would become an academy. The coalition government took over that strategy and amended it so that you could become an academy if you were already good, but then you could take on other schools within a chain to help support them. And a lot of those schools have become what we call teaching schools. So they are taking on a role like a teaching hospital. So they train teachers and they support them. And they'll have a federation of schools that they aim to improve and get to academy status across the whole academy chain. So yeah, so what seems to have made a difference is a head teacher having the empowerment and the resources to take action themselves in that structure, because they are independent of the state. Technically, an academy is an independent state school.
Yeah, and I think in this, I mean, I agree with all of that. In this study, the schools which were academies benefited because they joined academy chains. So they had the isolation was instantly gone, and they were part of something bigger. And sometimes they were given, so that you have the overarching governing structure of the chain, and that person, the boss of that, would say, okay, this head teacher from this school, you go over there for a couple of years, fix it, get it into our model of doing things, and that helped in some cases. But it's not. It's quite controversial, and people have many different views about academies. So. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your attendance and your comments. Thank you very much.